Hey everybody, I wanted to welcome you to this week's episode of the Integrated Man Project podcast, and I wanted to give a quick update that I recorded this episode about a month ago or so, and since the recording with Brad from Dharma Doctor, I've had a chance to play with these tabs for EMDR with clients. I've used them, gosh, I can't even, at least 50 times by now. I've used them myself, and I want to say that this is the product for you. This episode's all about interviewing Brad from Dharma Doctor, who shares about his journey about creating tabs, or you might know them as tappers, that create bilateral stimulation. And so this is great for clinicians and therapists who are EMDR certified or practice EMDR, and they want kind of some hardware for bilateral stimulation. That's not a light bar, that's not their hand, but something that people hold. In fact, they look like this. They're great. They come in this little case here, and you just activate them kind of like this, and they turn on, and they're really great, and you can control them through the app. There's an app on the phone, and what I love about these, one thing I love about these is that you can do this virtually. So if I have a client who's on a video conference call, they have their own tabs at home, I can control the tempo, the intensity from my phone virtually, which is a game changer. That's one of the things I think that I found difficult doing EMDR virtually, is that I'm limited to only certain forms of bilateral stimulation, and this is a game changer. So I stand by this product, and if you're interested, if you're a therapist, clinician wanting to grab a pair of these, or if you're just a client who wants to grab these as well to help reduce anxiety, stress, help with meditation, things like that, go ahead and click on my affiliate link below for a discount for you. It's in the description. Anyway, without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode with Brad, where we kind of do a deep dive, sharing his story, his journey, and kind of what's coming up with the Dharma Doctor. So without further ado, let's jump in. Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Integrated Man Project podcast. I'm excited to have this guest on for numerous reasons. But before we jump into all those reasons, I just want to welcome Brad to the show. Hey, Brad, how you doing this evening?
Great to be here, Travis. Thanks for having me.
So can you tell us just a quick bit of who you are, what you're doing, where you're located, stuff like that?
Yeah, name's Brad Mosell. I am in Boise, Idaho this fine evening, and I'm the CEO of a company called Dharma Doctor. And we're building a bilateral stimulator to make bilateral stimulation accessible to anyone, anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, and that's a big reason why I have you on, is because I'm actually excited for the product that you are creating and that I will be having in my hands very soon. Very excited to have them. Yes, very excited. But I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of background on why you started the Dharma Doctor, and kind of what is bilateral stimulation for those that don't know that are listening. Can you speak a little bit more about those things?
Yeah. So I guess, a little bit about my background. I was formerly, prior to starting this company, was in education. And I worked with sort of at-risk youth and was teaching GED programs for kids who had dropped out, and teaching history at a school for pregnant and parenting teens, so kids with kids. And the genesis of what we're doing came from this idea that we needed, better clinical level tools in non-clinical settings. So, that was kind of my framework, was how do I provide better resources in areas that are resource scarce? And it motivated me to start this company. And, bilateral stimulation refers to the alternating stimulation of the left and right sides of the body. So it can be visual, tactile, or auditory. And it is just back and forth on the left and right sides. And what they've found is that has some really, really positive effects on the brain. So it was discovered as part of this broader therapy called EMDR, which I know you're very experienced in and a practitioner of, and we can talk more about that history. But at its core, bilateral stimulation is this alternation between the left and right sides, and so we are building tools to make that an accessible solution for anyone, anytime. So that anybody can use this to improve their mental well-being throughout the course of the day.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. Yeah, those that don't know what it is, and again, that's I wanted Brad to share, being someone who's designing a product for not just clinicians' use, but also for just the end user to engage with the use of bilateral stimulation. And Brad mentioned EMDR, and yes, I'm a certified EMDR clinician. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a trauma-informed modality and framework that uses BLS or bilateral stimulation as part of helping reduce really primarily trauma, whether it's capital T trauma, lowercase t trauma, and BLS or bilateral stimulation is the hallmark component that we use as part of kind of what we call our protocol when we're helping someone walk through an event or events that have what we call a negative charge or kind of a traumatic event that's kind of stuck in the body or the mind or the emotional states or beliefs. And so it's essentially what it is. I mean, I probably should have an episode full on about EMDR probably now that I think about it. So
That's not a bad idea.
yeah, not an idea. I should do that. I mean, you can look it up, but hey, I'll talk about it since you're listening to this podcast. I'll tell you about it since I'm certified in it and use it all the time. But that'll be TBD on that episode. Those that are listening and watching, I will have one come out. And how Brad and I met was through Instagram. Someone, I think he actually reached out. Now that I think about it, or no, his associate reached out, I believe.
Yeah, somebody from my team, I think.
Yeah, someone from your team. And quick side story for me is that in my industry as a clinician, the tools that are out there currently for this kind of bilateral stimulation are very limited, I would say. And not bad, just limited. They do the job. People have been using them for years and they work and they're fine. But something I found about them personally was they're kind of wired run. They're a little cumbersome, I feel like the tech is a little behind the time and kind of have been on the lookout for something that's utilizing more modern technology, a little more user-friendly with a better UI, user interface, and that might be able to have multiple purposes. And something that we have talked about, which you're going to probably tell us more about, is that what you have created is really a multi-purpose device, not just for someone like myself, but for anyone to pick up and do some kind of BLS stuff at home without a clinician in a safe environment with some different guided stuff, I'll say for now until I'll let you talk more about that. But
Sure.
so I was very excited that someone from your team reached out and said, hey, you should try this product. And I was like, I jumped on it. I went on the website. I'm like, ooh, this is exciting. It's wireless. There's all these features I'd want if I was going to create a product. And so I decided just to pre-order a pair. I'm like, well, we'll see how it goes. And then I decided to reach out to you and say, hey, I want to try the product. Let's have a conversation. And then here we are. So anyway, I'm actually really excited, and I'm excited to geek out with them and be all nerdy as a EMDR therapist clinician and play with them. So I can't wait to have them in my hands. And it got me excited because I think having something like what you're doing is so needed in our field, because I think it's going to create and allow for more innovation and people just pushing themselves to think of more other ways, more exciting ways to use a product to really help people. So kind of like boots on the ground, so to speak, get them in anyone's hands who could benefit, which I think when we had our first conversation offline, I was like, yes, that's such a great vision of how do we get these to more people, more readily available, more affordable, that are user-friendly to help people with something that is so helpful. So yeah, with that said, with my little spiel, going back to your product, you came up with your system and your idea because why? Like, why did you, I know you said you wanted to get this product to more people, but what kind of really was the impetus for you to design your own hardware? Because I know that's a whole ordeal, right?
Yeah, yeah. Starting a hardware startup is not recommended. It's generally warned against. Everybody tells you don't do it. This is a bad idea, and you have to be a certain type of stubborn in order to like see it through. So it's I did it. I guess or like the thesis around Dharma Doctor is that people when given simple tools can use them incredibly well, right?
Hmm.
We, as human beings, adapt and learn incredibly quickly. And if you have a tool, you learn how to use that and you integrate it if it works. And, I'd had experiences in Actually, prior to my experience with EMDR, I had a mentor who was a EMDR clinician for the VA,
Hmm.
and he gave me my first pair of tappers. These like old Neurotechs or TheraTappers, which are the boxy, wired, looks like a Game Boy from the '80s, sort of
Yep.
like tech. But he told me to use it in my morning meditation practice, and
Hmm.
so I was confused by this thing. I was like, this is weird. It's old looking, but like I'll do it. And what I found was that there was something immediately helpful in that bilateral stimulation. Like it
Hmm.
helped me get grounded in a way that just breathing or just awareness or other guided meditations, it was faster, and it was a different modality, and it was a tool, right? It was a tool to help. And so when I was teaching and working with kids and trying to sort of tackle this mental health problem, the question, that first came to mind is not necessarily what are the resources people need, but it's how do you build a resource somebody will use, right?
Hmm.
Like there are a lot of mental health apps out there. And the great reality is that people use them like once or twice, and you do something and then you kind of just let it go and you lapse, or you decide, hey, like you just forget about it. And if you want to build a lasting sort of tool, we have to bridge that from the theoretical and the conceptual into the real world. And in the real world, you need a real device. And so that was kind of like, well, I guess we're going to have to build a hardware, a tool.
Hmm.
And my students at a various they may not be ready, right, to engage in deeper cognitive behavioral therapy or try and uncover this trauma at a very real way. I just wanted something that we could stabilize with so that we could get through like fractions on the GED, right? We're trying
Hmm.
to build a tool that can be used in these high, very important and highly influential inflection points in one person's life, right?
Hmm.
Like getting a GED changes the trajectory of an individual's life forever. In fact, it's probably the most effective single achievement that you can do to open up doors for the rest of your life. And yet, it hinges on the ability to score above a 145 on these four particular tests. And these students that I work with at times, they're ready, they've gone all the learning, and then you go into this test environment, and immediately you're flooded, with
Hmm.
all of the fear. You lose the recall, and you're back in this scenario where you're unable to process. And we wanted a tool that could just even cut the edge off a little bit at that
Hmm.
point, right? And if we could build a tool that could do it, not just do that, but then also open up the gateways to higher levels of care when you are ready, right? When you are ready to explore, what's going on, and what's the neuroscience and what's happening with your brain, and what are the memories, what's the memory network, what is trauma. Like when you're ready to dig into that, you also have a platform to do that. When you're ready to work with a therapist, you can use that same tool with a therapist. You have a stepped care pathway built into one device. It creates a lower barrier to entry to these services, right? And the hardest phone call anybody ever makes is the first call they make to ask for help, you know? And the
Yeah.
amount of pain and suffering and like silent loneliness that precedes that call is where so much harm is created, because we're trying to do it on our own. And so if we can lower that barrier by building a device that you can just hand to somebody, rather than it being a conversation, rather than it immediately diving into the deeper elements of therapy, like it fundamentally changes the accessibility of mental health resources. And that
Hmm.
was, that idea is what really drove us to build a hardware device. Because I had every investor under the sun tell me, well, can't you just do this with an app? Or like, can't we just do this in software? And it was like, unfortunately, if we want to build this thing, we can't. We just can't. We
Right.
have to build the tool. So that's what motivated that.
And the tool is so needed, the
Yeah.
tool is so needed. It really is. It makes a difference for a lot of people because that's one form of BLS, the tappers. Um, and I know those eye movement's the classic one, but I've worked with a lot of people that they can't do eye movement. It's hard for them. It's actually more, while I know that's how EMDR came about was eye movement, and a lot of the research was done based upon eye movement in the trials. which is very effective still. I find, a good majority of people, they actually prefer tappers and holding so they can close their eyes and kind of visualize what's happening. So it's great to have different products that, and especially your product coming out now, to be able to people to have hold easier to use, less cumbersome. Like you said, it definitely felt something like out of the 80s. The devices, so they felt just more cumbersome. They didn't feel intuitive. The shape was kind of odd and awkward to
Yeah.
hold. It just didn't feel, I don't know, it felt more cumbersome. While they worked, they just felt kind of odd, so to speak.
Do you
Myself.
typically use the tactile, or do you use the light bar, or like butterfly hugs? What are the different
Yeah. So
modalities you use
I
in
don't
practice?
I don't have a light bar. Never ended up investing in one
They're
personally
expensive. They're not cheap.
because no, they're huge. They're not small, so they're big, they're expensive. Um, so I just would just do my arm for eye movement, the classic back and forth, like that, and self tapping. Um, butterfly on thighs. Some people I would just tap their knees if it was comfortable for them or me. Um, I would do that, and or just the tappers, which I had a pair of Neurotechs as well. So, but I would just find I have to be close because the wires were not long enough, and then it just
Yeah.
sometimes I'd be like, I don't want to use it because just storing wire, just I can't stand all the wires and cables personally. So
Yeah.
I would use them because people preferred them and liked them, especially because sometimes with butterfly tapping, which is good, but sometimes that could also be hard for some of my clients because they'd have to be counting in their head, and they felt they'd have to count, and so they couldn't just sit there and focus and be present because they were more worried, especially like my clients with like ADHD or something like that. They'd be more focused on counting the taps, or some of my higher anxiety clients, they'd be more like, am I tapping right? Was
Yeah.
often I'm like, so now for
I
some
know what
people
you mean.
self-tapping is totally fine, so it really is person dependent, but I think having the product that you are releasing is going to be I just can't wait to use it with my clients. I think they're going to jump on it because it is easier to use, it's wireless, they can sit, and it's not cumbersome. So but yeah, those are my main BLS tools that I use. So
Nice.
yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to do the self tapping. I mean, I even when I'm doing it, it's hard to like self tap and try to like let go because you have to be engaged. Like you have to stay somewhat engaged while you're also trying to disengage, and it's a difficult process.
Yes, it is. It really is, and it's hard. It's really hard to do to have because it's a lot of processes happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So anything to make it easier for the client to engage and one less barrier, I'm all for. And so you built this company and decided to make a device company, and again, investors like, no, I can't because you need something physical for this. I guess you could you could have done audio and something else, but I think the physical thing is actually very much a needed thing because again, there's not a lot of competition. It's like no one's really doing much with it, new and inventive. And so you did that, and now we're coming on the first round of release, right?
Yeah,
That's kind of a big deal for the company.
the first shipment arrived today. Today, like I have next to me. Let's see if I can hold this up. I don't know. Let's
Yes,
see.
please do.
It's a box.
Oh, look at that.
So we have a bunch of them sitting here in my office now, but yeah, so we have the first batch, and I'm going to start shipping out the pre-orders next week. So you will
Sweet.
receive your tabs hopefully by the end of next week.
Oh,
Um,
I'm so excited.
but for the people that we've been talking about this, and I haven't really
Yeah,
shown what the
let's.
device looks like or whatever, but so these are the tabs, and
Okay.
they look kind of, it's like a charging case. You open them up, and we have these two silicone
Yeah.
overmolded tabs. You pull them out, and they're magnetized in there, and then they turn on automatically. And I'll turn this off, but they turn
Oh,
on,
nice.
and then you just click the button, and it provides visual and tactile bilateral stimulation. And you can change the speed of alternation, changes the color. You can also change the intensity of the vibration. And we've got 3 settings pre-programmed, 2 intensities. It goes back to standby. And then these little tabs also connect to our Dharma Doctor app. So the app allows you to customize speed and intensity. I think there's 8 different settings on both. And it has some other pretty cool features as well.
Yeah. So those, if you were listening, you're gonna want to jump on the YouTube version, Google, whatever it's now called, Google YouTube podcast. It's all one now, to see it, because they're really. I mean, on the camera looks great, so I can't wait to see it in person. They look really cool, and I love the features, by the way, that you could turn them on manually as the user themselves, like by itself, without even the app, without anything, that you could just activate them, they're on, and you have some preset settings, which is, I don't know anyone else has done that yet. I have another company, which are great. It's just, again, limited. I still have to activate them really and change settings on my end. So I think that's such a cool tool. And the light too. It's like combined with the light and with, which is good for me as a clinician, because I could visually see as
What's
well.
going on? Yeah.
Which is super great for me, because the other brand I have that is, there's a use for the one I have called BiTap,
Yeah.
which I do like, especially for like athletes or something. They can, they can attach them to the wrists and things like that. But there's no light, so I have to look at the app to know what the speed is, and I don't get that visual response. But anyway, those look amazing and they look great, and I love the wireless charging. They just looks like they sit in there and magnetically charge. It's great. I mean, it's really cool, and they charge in the case. I'm assuming you just plug the
Yeah.
case in.
Yeah, I
Kinda
mean,
like in,
the case can charge them like twice without being plugged in, and then you plug the case in, and it charges. So it has a full charging capacity, just like your AirPods.
great.
And then yeah, you can. I'll show this too, but when they're connected to the app, you have the tabs, and we have this app here. Let's see if I can get the camera.
Oh, there we go. I was trying
There
to
it
find it.
goes.
Oh, there it is.
So
Yeah.
you can see it, and then when I press start, so the tabs will go, and you can see what's going on the screen. It all matches up, and you can change the speed and the intensity to whatever you want, and adjust that there.
It's so
And
rad.
then one of my favorite features is we have the ability to do remote access. So if you're working with a client and you want to do it via telehealth, if they have these, you can generate a code, and then they enter the code, and the therapist can control them from anywhere. So you can do remote tactile bilateral stimulation in a very, very easy setup. And that's like the amount of access that creates for EMDR, I think, is just really important, because it opens up this door to using this modality in a way that traditionally it's been pretty limited. It's really hard. I mean, telling somebody to do the butterfly hug is hard. Telling them to do it over Zoom is even harder. And so we have that capability. The other capability that I'm super proud of is we have the ability to do one to many. So the controller can control multiple pairs of tabs at the same time. And there have been some incredible EMDR practitioners who have built out group therapy protocols, really using them in environments where, say, after a natural disaster, when a whole community has been affected and it is too time intensive to work with each individual, you can do immediate sort of trauma intervention with a large group population. And this enables us to do that, much more effectively. And like that sort of scalability changes the whole picture of how many people could be affected by one practitioner. Right now we have this huge shortage, right? There's just not enough clinicians for the demand. And this will enable us to create new protocols and new modalities for therapists. Like, we can imagine EMDR therapists having group sessions or like group offerings to provide access to more people. And my North Star vision, is what would it be like if you could give these to 1 million students at once? Like if you could give this to a whole school after a traumatic incident, after some sort of gun violence, or a whole generation of kids who were just affected by a government lockdown that like kicked them out of school for a year. You know what I mean? Like these are things that they've created these, psychic shockwaves that we are dealing with and will continue to deal with for the next forever. But if we can use tools like this to intervene at scale, we can put things kind of back on the track, or help heal the world at scale. And that's really, really exciting for me.
Yeah, and I love that. That's your North Star, like, yeah, a million students, right? Or especially a recent traumatic event and be able to have a huge group protocol. Because you're right, there is a shortage and there's not enough clinicians. There just isn't. It's too big of a
There's just not.
demand, low supply. It just isn't. You're right. We need more. And also, I think with the old tech is I think it was more limited, and you're right. The telehealth thing is huge for me too because I find it hard to do telehealth EMDR. It's doable, but the self tapping is tough, and the people don't like a lot of people. I don't like the audio as much. The back and forth eye movement is it's harder. But having this capacity and for me to control it is like a game changer. Like when you told me that I can control it wirelessly to my video sessions, it's like that's huge, major game changer. Like that'll change everything, especially if I'm going to work with a client long term. I could build it into the fee where they're buying the product that they have that they can use the rest of their life, and it's partly kind of built into the few sessions of like making it more affordable, and then they are able to get it and then use it, and then I can help them, and they can also practice outside of session too. That's another thing I'm excited about is they can have this device to continue to do what we call resourcing or positive meditative exercises or breathwork exercises that helps us to create that neural pathway more effectively. Those that don't know, there's a lot of research on BLS, and one of the things it does that they found is it can really help, because anything we do that's new, it takes time to create a new neural pathway and a new connection in our brain to make it more effective. And so what they found with BLS is that it can help increase the speed at which that neural pathways are generated and created and connected in our brain, which is amazing. That's one of the benefits of positive use. And so, yeah, that is what a great vision. And really, I bet I mean, how excited are you right now that you have the first box? I mean, it's like
I
a
mean,
big deal. I mean,
I'm pretty excited. It's a little overwhelming, but it's pretty great. I spent the day today. I was able to deliver some of the tabs to some of my very first customers and like hand them off, and it was such a fulfilling moment. I mean, I started this almost 2.5 years ago was
wow.
when day zero kind of came in,
Wow.
and there were people that I think the first pair was purchased about 6 months in.
Mm,
I didn't really have any product, but about 6 months in, somebody was like, "Here's $100. Please send me it whenever you make this thing." And so
yeah.
now I get to deliver those like tabs to the people that believed in it, and
Wow.
it's so
Hmm.
fulfilling. It's such a cool moment. But the work's really just getting started too, because now we get to bring them out. And for you talk about sort of that it helps solidify these neural pathways. And we've been, one of our mentors, he's a professor here at Boise State. He uses bilateral stimulation with the student athletes
Hmm.
to help them with their visualization exercises. So in sports psychology, you
Yeah.
provide the bilateral stimulation while you're doing your visualization exercises to improve your performance. And he's seen incredible results.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just trauma. Like it's not just anxiety. It is a tool to help the brain. And I
Hmm.
mean, I guess we didn't really talk about this, but what the mechanism of action, more or less, and there's debate about this, whether it's, REM sleep or what the cross hemispheric is, but the basic idea is that it disengages the fight or flight response, your amygdala hijack that like
Yep.
puts the neural pathway back through the limbic region and into your emotional lizard brain, right? And it
Hmm.
re-engages the prefrontal cortex or your rational
Yes.
brain. And that cross hemispheric back and forth gets that prefrontal cortex re-engaged. And just thinking about like throughout the day, if you have your prefrontal cortex more engaged, you're going to make better decisions. You're going to
Hmm.
make more rational decisions, right? And
Right.
you're going to
Right.
have
Right.
more access to making to all the information you need to make that decision, rather than being responsive, rather than being reactive.
Yeah.
And this crosses over into basically every area of psychology, every area of like whether it's trauma or substance abuse disorders or
Totally.
just basic neuro dysregulation. Like
Well, basic to us
there's
because we've
easy
studied it, but
crossovers.
not everyone knows that. Basic because we've done studies. You've done studies. I've done.
Yeah.
I'm trained, but it is basic. But most people don't know that. And I think you hit such a good point. And little geek session for those listening. That yeah, when you're if you had a traumatic event, or whether you're stuck in overwhelming anxiety or in a fight flight state, just to keep it simple, everyone knows fight, flight, freeze. When you're in that state, your prefrontal cortex is shut off. It's like the light bulb goes out. And now you're just stuck in the midbrain or the limbic system, like you said, and the amygdala, or the kind of the more reptilian brain. So that's all about, survival, essentially. So whether it's trauma you're responding to, or you got the yips, right, like an athlete, and usually though that's rooted in fear and anxiety, typically. So it's shutting off this part of the brain. Yeah, you're right that the bilateral stimulations helps the nervous system re-engage that, which enables you to create that new pathway. So you're not just run by the limbic system, fight, flight, but it gets you out of, allowing you to actually move through the fight, flight, but moving through the heightened anxiety or the total shutdown or the anger. And it helps you kind of move through that wave and then get to the other side, which is then when we're re-engaging. So it allows almost and that's the reprocessing part, right? Is that we're taking the old story or narrative and we're like putting the piece of the puzzle together. And as we do that, it kind of reduces the distress in our body and our brains, and then it releases that energy so it's no longer stuck, right? And then we can actually perform, whether it's in sports or, if I'm thinking of someone I've worked with, I've worked with first responders. I'm thinking of firefighters, police officers I've worked with, where they can now go back into what they need to do because that part of their brain is not stuck, or actual trauma, right? People that are totally stuck in panic attacks or PTSD symptoms or other types of what we call, disorders, right? But really, what's a disorder? It's really a dysregulated nervous system. That's something that's stuck, right? At the end of the day. And so, that's the beautiful thing with BLS is it's such I think we're finding, like your professor, there's so many ways we could use it now that is really life-giving. And it's not just for trauma.
No, and so our chief clinical advisor, Dr. Amy Sarin, she's done a lot of research around BLS, and she's done EEG scans while providing bilateral stimulation. Because inside of EMDR, there was unclear uncertainty as to what the mechanism of action was for a long time, and there's also this fear of disassociation, right? That somehow bilateral stimulation is going to lead to disassociation if used independently. And she did these studies, and she found that it's not. It's just not. It's just helpful, through and through. And even if you go back to the early days of EMDR, Francine Shapiro, when she was exploring EMDR, people said, if you use bilateral stimulation to desensitize to fear, people won't have healthy fears, right? They'll just be desensitized to everything, and then they'll go around and without those healthy fears, they won't be able to navigate the world correctly, and it's going to go too far, right? And this was a legitimate critique and criticism or fear that came out of the early research in EMDR. And what she found, which is really the miracle, is that it doesn't. We just heal. We heal back to a natural state. When you get rid of the thing that's blocked, the body doesn't go too far. Instead, it just goes back to normal. And that's so different than, say, prescribing a medication, right? Where even if you use a medication appropriately, right, there's a line there where it quickly tips over into the inappropriate desensitization, right? And so much of mental health prescriptions, and I'm not a doctor, this is not medical advice, but my experience is that taking different psych meds, it's a cocktail, and we're just trying to get the balance right so much of the time to not overshoot it, right? And bilateral stimulation doesn't have that same overshooting effect, right? It's not going to cause extra harm. At the end of the day, the worst thing that happens with bilateral stimulation is that it doesn't do anything, right? That's the worst case scenario, is that this just doesn't affect, or you don't have the effect. And that's so safe. It's such a different and safe and natural healing mechanism that the brain can use.
No, and well said. And I think, the medication, that's a whole other topic. But I think with that, you're right. I think the possible side effects, and this is where I completely agree that the possible negative side effect is relatively low, considering in comparison to a medication.
And I'm not anti-medication. I don't mean by any means.
Yeah, I didn't hear that.
There's a natural place for this. but
Yeah.
it's
But I
really
agree.
amazing that the brain heals back to a natural homeostasis. You know,
Yeah.
when
No, totally.
the problem's removed, we have this amazing innate capacity to heal.
Yeah, we really do. The brain and the body know where it needs to go, which is always fascinating when I work with individuals when we're doing some past work, especially when the client doesn't know where they need to go.
Yeah,
There's this technique called bridging, not to get too geeky, but essentially where there's something coming up in the present, whether it's a belief like I'm worthless or I'm going to fail or whatever, something like that, for example, or I'm going to fail this test or I'm going to fail this interview. I'm going to drop the winning pass in football. We usually do bridging where there's a technique where we kind of light up their brain. We think of the image and what's the emotion, what's the body sensation, what's the immediate belief or thought. And that's kind of like the launching pad. And then we kind of go back in time, which is something that Parnell did a lot of with when she came up with Laurel Parnell, who came up with attachment-focused EMDR, which is kind of working on more the attachment deficits or attachment wounds in early childhood. And when we go bridge back, and often we land on some earlier events or memory or chain of memories that have very similar ties to the present, usually in form of the similar emotional, bodily, or thought state. And because the brain knew it needed to go there. And oftentimes the clients are kind of like, sometimes like they're almost like they forgot that it what even occurred, and it's now so vivid in their mind as if they're reliving it. And that's the
yeah,
part where the bilateral stimulation isn't going to have the side effect. It's almost like the brain and body is now re-experiencing the emotion that had to be shut down or quickly moved past. And that's more of the negative side effect in the moment, is that they're now feeling the distress, the overwhelm, the anxiety, the fear, the sadness, whatever the pain is of the emotional bodily pain. The bilateral stimulation is really actually, in that sense, it's helping them move through it. As another way of looking at it, it's helping them get unstuck from the memory, helping their brain reprocess in an effective way because they're in the present in a safe environment. So it's allowing their brain and body to kind of move and not kind of be stuck in the mud, so to speak. And so that's something I've seen time and time and time and time and time again with the clients I've worked with. And again, for those, I've worked with plenty of people too on medications that's really helped them actually get ready for EMDR.
yeah,
And then we do the work, and then we look at titration down off of medications later, because sometimes they're either so depressed or so wrought with PTSD that's like doing anything is like near impossible. So sometimes the medications is like let's do this to help make somewhat of a change while we do this, like EMDR or BLS or something else. And then we begin to, as we heal, we could look at, okay, let's see if we get off medications now. And what I've seen with quite a few people is that either they get off it entirely or greatly reduces it, so it's barely there, because now like their brain and body is like so much healing's done, so they don't need that. It's like that pillar of support is no longer needed because it's been restored. So yeah, it's really cool. I'm excited. I can't wait. I'm so stoked to get it. So I'm going to be very much looking like a kid on Christmas, looking in my mailbox, every day leading up to next week. So
yeah.
I'm going to be, did it come yet? Did it come in? And I have a Nest camera, so I'll know when it comes. I'll be able to see it on my phone, and I'll probably be at work, and I'll have to wait to get home. So I'll probably be, biting my nails to open up the box. My wife will be like, "What is this?" Well, let's try it out. I'll have her test them out for me. These things light up. I'm like, I
Wow.
know.
Yeah, it's man, healing when you start opening that box, right? And you talk about this so much, but when we start opening and peeling back those layers, and you do a bridge back exercise for the first time, where you start seeing the way your emotional response to today so deeply by these events and
Yeah,
these experiences. And
yeah,
at first that can be really daunting, because it's like I feel a little powerless, right? That I'm being
mm,
guided by all of this baggage and all of this experience. And then to find access to a tool that enables you to change, right? Like that ability to change is the genesis of hope, you know?
mm,
It's like this belief that, maybe something could be different.
mm,
Maybe I could live differently than I have in the past. And, that's there are very few things in life that I think are more inspiring than that. Because who among us hasn't had that moment of being like, if only I could do this differently, right? Like
Hmm.
where we come to grips with our own limitations and our own baggage.
Yeah.
My own journey in starting this company and actually being in the company is like I've had to face a lot of that, from periods of my childhood where I felt powerless, or like where I wasn't able to fix the things that needed to get fixed. And some of that you carry with you. And so when you start a company, you got to be able to fix everything, right? You have like the buck stops here, right? And it's only because of bilateral simulation, EMDR, and what I've learned along the way that I could even function and build this company, because there was a
Hmm.
period of time where I really didn't and I couldn't. So yeah, that spoke deeply to me, Travis.
Hmm. Yeah. And I thank you for sharing that. And, as I think about how bilateral stimulation can lead to more kind of being integrated as a human, when you hear that, like how does that speak to you? Like that bilateral stimulation can help us become more integrated.
I think being integrated it's like a pursuit, right? Like
Mm,
integrated, and think of it similar to alignment. And we often hear people talk about being balanced. Like trying to find balance in my life, and
mm,
I personally feel like balance is a form of managing, right? It's like I've got this over here, and I've got this compartmentalized here, and I'm trying to produce the correct compartmentalization in order to achieve this outcome. And the idea of integration, for me is like when when we don't have to do that anymore, right? When we don't have to
mm,
manage anything, instead we get to
mm,
be who we are, who we were intended to be. And
mm.
that doesn't mean that we're perfect, doesn't mean that we fixed everything, right? But we don't have to compartmentalize or hide or, be ashamed of some of those shadowy areas that typically we kind of push back, or memories that we want to avoid or evade. And instead we just get to be fully honest with ourselves. But bilateral stimulation is a tool in that. That is much bigger than bilateral stimulation. It's much bigger than Dharma Doctor. It's much bigger than anything, right? Like it's life. I think in a lot of ways it's
Yeah.
the spiritual path, the quest of
Yeah.
personal self-actualization. But if we can create more tools, have better conversations, normalize this language, I think we can support people through that process of embracing, the things that they previously discarded in themselves.
Yeah.
And that's, like that's a big monumental task for sure.
Yeah. And I really do believe with having a product that is more accessible, more attainable, more user friendly, especially for the upcoming generation, with the tech that they have now, having something that they'll be able to easily use because they're used to similar products already, right?
Yeah.
In a way, kind of using the tech out that speaks to them where it's in ease, like you said this earlier on, but they may not be ready for therapy yet. But this is one less barrier to get them engaged with a product that might intrigue them, and then they do a couple basic, breathing exercises or something else, and they're seeing, there's something different about this, and then that might open a door to, if they need to, maybe more deeper work, if that's what's going on for them. But it's that less barrier thing, which I think is so important. Is how do we help people get engaged in some form of healing with the least amount of barriers? So it's more of like a no brainer, for lack of a better word, that they can just engage in it and then start to kind of reap the benefit. And to some degree, and this is one thing I found with BLS and EMDR, sometimes it's like if they don't even realize it until weeks later or a month later, and they're like, that doesn't bother me anymore. Like that thing that used to bug them for so long and would consume them for so long. It's like they have to think about it. And I asked them in my office, like, how you doing with that thing, that thought or that worry, whatever. And they're like, I think about it. I don't, it hasn't really showed up, which is like, it's like, and I've heard this said super numerous times. It's like, what, like the Jedi mind trick or wizardry, or like what magic trick did you pull? I'm like, dude, that's just your brain healing itself, man. That's just like, the power of the brain and the body, when it has the right tool to help heal itself, it just kind of, those things that were so stuck before become unstuck, and then you can't find it anymore. It's like you have to think hard about it, and you're like, well, it doesn't and the thing that probably bothered them for their entire life or most of their life. And so I am so stoked for this product, and I'm wondering, so if people want to get their hands on it, whether they're a clinician or just a regular Joe that's like, hey, I would love to use this for my meditation or mindfulness practices or for my baseball team or whatever, where can we get your product?
Yeah. So dharmadoctor.com, DHARMADR.com, or you can search wireless bilateral stimulators. I think we come up like first or second now in Google SEO too. So
That's huge.
either one of those. And we haven't really talked about this, but I would love to offer, some sort of discount code for anybody listening to the podcast. So check the show notes. We'll have some sort of code there, and Travis and I will figure it out. But
Well, should we just make one up?
it could just be like Integrated Man Project.
There we go. Yeah.
That
What?
work?
Dharma Doctor / Integrated Man Project.
Yeah, that works.
dharmadoctor.com. Sorry. dharmadoctor.com
dharmadoctor.com / Integrated Man Project.
There you go. Discount code. Done.
Discount code.
So get it. So we'll have it ready for you, and it'll also be in the show notes and link as well. But for those that don't look at show notes, I wanted you to hear it, because not everyone looks at show notes and clicks on things. But yeah, I would love to get more people on and get more people buying it. So I'm going to share this thing like crazy. And I've already talked to some of my fellow clinicians in my office because they're looking for a new product. I'm like, hey, as soon as this thing gets in, I want to let you borrow them for a few sessions. So you can take them for a whirl, because I know you're going to love them. Because I already, just seeing them, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I'm so excited. I'm like holding it back. And obviously probably not more excited than you. This is a 2.5 year, like this has been your life for 2.5 years. So I'm excited for you. Like, I'm like, I'm like, yeah, I'm excited for you, Brad.
Oh,
Like,
and the packaging is so beautiful. Like,
yes, it really is.
Look at this really quickly.
Yeah.
Man, it's like,
oh yeah,
Doctor.
Oh, look at that.
Got this beautiful flower, and here are the tabs and the charging cable, and it's really gorgeous.
Let me ask this too, real quick.
Yeah.
So for those, I'm wondering, and I ask this, so why Dharma Doctor? What?
Yeah,
there's a reason, I'm sure, behind that. It's not just a random name that was available out there, but
no, not quite. In my own spiritual journey, I dabbled in some of the Eastern practices as well as these Western practices, and there's a William Blake quote actually that says, when the doors of perception are cleared, man sees reality as it is, infinite. And fun fact, that quote is actually where the Doors got their name. The Doors.
The band.
Windows of Perception. But the idea of this quote is that, like, the great spirit, the greater reality, Dharma, and I'm kind of, this is a loose translation, but what I like to think of it as reality. What blocks us from experiencing that is the bondage of self, like our trauma, our baggage, all of these things that we carry with us. And if we can cure those things, or we can move those things, or we can build tools that help us reduce the weight of that baggage, we can see the world a little more clearly. We can experience the Dharma a little more clearly. And so it's kind of this bridging of sort of the Eastern thought of meditation and the West and yoga, and like the Western thoughts of EMDR and clinical psychology and psychoanalysis. And, we wanted a tool we wanted to build a device that looked just as good on a yoga mat as it did in a clinician's office, that looks just as good on a business desk as it does in a kid's backpack. And Dharma Doctor kind of speaks to like the uniting of these two worlds. That I've also spent a lot of time in both. So
yeah, thanks for sharing that. That made it more. I felt I'm hearing more of the vision. I got more of the story. It made even more real on top of just the hardware, but like really the blending of these, like you said, the East and the West, and like taking the best of and saying, how do we really? I love that too. I want this to look good on anyone's shelf, from yoga mat to clinical office to kids backpack. I think it's great.
And they do look good anywhere. I mean, I can't wait for you to hold these, because I'm so proud of them right now. They're really, 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 and the team has done an incredible job.
Yeah. And those that are listening, you need to watch the video version of this. So please go to YouTube and watch it if you're not. Maybe you're already watching, but those listening on the audio, Spotify and Apple, go check it out so you could see a little quick preview. Because there it is again, beautiful case with the flower. And is that a specific flower? Did you come up with that, or is that like
I
a?
actually designed this logo myself.
Oh, nice.
And originally it was based, well, it's the Dharma Doctor logo now, but it
Yeah.
was the inspiration. The inspiration was the Columbine flowers in Colorado.
Wow.
And so it's sort of it's a play on this Columbine flower, but that's my favorite flower in the high mountains of Colorado. I lived in Telluride for a little while, and they bloom up in these incredibly like desolate high mountain valleys, and they're the most elegant flower you've ever seen. So it's derived from that, but yeah,
That's so
I did
cool.
design it.
That's awesome. So those listening, you want to check it out. It's dharmadoctor.com. The Instagram is just Dharma Doctor,
It's
right?
it's
Dharma Doctor.
at my Dharma Doctor,
Oh, at my Dharma Doctor.
and
This will
that's the
also be
same
linked in
for
the show
all
notes.
the social
Okay.
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Spotify.
Okay.
We have at
My
my
Dharma
Dharma
Doctor.
Doctor.
Okay. And the website's dharmadoctor.com. And for that discount code, dharmadoctor.com/integrated man project. Hey, Brad, thank you so much. I am so stoked. And by the time I release this, I'll be having in my hands. So thank you so much and have an awesome. You probably won't be able to sleep, my guess, because you'll be so excited. Or you'll finally crash because you finally have the first product in your hands. So your body can finally rest, but it may not be. It might just be energized. So I hope you get some sleep tonight. I'll just say that you can sleep, or you'll just be so excited, playing with your toys. But
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was a really wonderful conversation, and I can't wait for you to have them. You can add a little addendum here at the end of the show and say, I received the tabs and they are everything we talked about,
Oh, I will add an addendum. Absolutely. For sure. But hey, have a great night, man. And I can't wait to get in my hands. So blessings to you. And thank you for the work you're doing in innovating a product that I really think the world needs. So thank you so much.
Likewise, my friend.